Lakeland Currents, your public affairs program for north central Minnesota. Production funding for Lakeland Currents is made possible by Bemidji Regional Airport, serving the region with daily flights to Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. More information available at bemidjiairport.org. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, friends. I'm Jason Eden, your host of Lakeland Currents. Thanks for joining the conversation today, and thanks for your ongoing support of Lakeland Public TV. We're fortunate here in Minnesota. We live in a part of the world with a very low pollution burden. What role does the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency play in that? What does the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency do on a daily basis? Well, here to help us answer those questions is my guest, Stephen Mickelson, who's the Information Officer for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency out of the Brainerd office. Stephen, welcome to the conversation, and thanks for making time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I want to start with kind of a big picture question here. I'm just curious about the value of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So I was wondering if you could tell me, where does public health end and the environment begin?
Well, we like to think they're intermingled and there's overlap. Our mission is to enhance the environment and human health. Though there are other agencies like Department of Health deals directly with public health, but the connection of the health of the environment can have direct effects on people's physical health, whether it's the quality of the air or the water that they're drinking, the water they're recreating in, the groundwater that they're pulling into their homes. It's all interconnected. So, we like to think of it as kind of a cohesive effort to protect and enhance both.
Well, of course, pollution doesn't honor state boundaries, but your jurisdiction is the state of Minnesota. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you grapple with that. How do you deal with pollution that doesn't necessarily come from Minnesota?
Yeah, there's two sides of that. Dealing, like you said, with pollution that may not come from Minnesota, but it's here. And then also making sure any pollution within our boundaries isn't affecting beyond our boundaries. So kind of coming in, going out. I think of air quality as one example. A lot of times when you see air quality alerts that come over the news and people's phones and on websites, a lot of those are triggered by things that are happening outside our boundaries. Wildfires up in Canada or on the West Coast, different kinds of weather patterns and systems can bring air that's more polluted from other parts of the country just by the way the winds are blowing. So we have to be aware of that at all times, knowing that we still need to make the citizens of Minnesota aware when that pollution may affect them. So those air quality alerts, for example, we tell people who have lung conditions like asthma, which I happen to have, or the elderly, real young kids, stay indoors when there's these air quality alerts. It's really no different with water too. Minnesota is very unique in that we have 5 major river basins that originate in our state. So they all flow out of the borders. So we're very conscious of making sure that the efforts we're doing in Minnesota, we're doing our best not only to serve Minnesotans, but we want the water that we're sending out of our borders is as clean as possible for the next user downstream.
That makes a great deal of sense. But on a related note, I know that climate change and climate adaptation is a priority for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. But again, a lot of what's driving climate change isn't necessarily happening here in Minnesota. So what are your priorities with regard to climate change, and how is the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency dealing with actors that aren't under your control?
Actors that aren't under our control, that we don't, we're not their permitting authority, would be probably appropriate way to put it. You try and create partnerships, educate each other, keep each other informed on efforts we're doing in the state. There are collaborations among agencies, groups of state agencies. There's a group that all states that border the Great Lakes, for example, they meet quite regularly at the state level to talk about what each other is doing and try and coordinate efforts, because we're all impacting the same air, we're all impacting the same water, and they want to try and get on the same page as best as possible, given that everyone has their own legislatures and their own state governments. But overall, just trying to have a cohesive approach to the changing climate and the adaptations that we might face because of those changes to the climate. Those that are out of our control need to figure out how to adapt so we can handle it for generations to come.
That's really interesting, your reference to the Great Lakes. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the Great Lakes Compact. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to, because of course what happens in the St. Louis River watershed could affect communities as far downstream as Toronto. So tell us a little bit more about those interagency conversations.
St. Louis River is a great example of that. The MPCA has, for many years, had a lot of partnerships and collaborations that go across the Minnesota-Wisconsin border, working in conjunction with that state. And then also federal agencies, EPA, Fish and Wildlife, the Coast Guard. And so what Minnesota's doing in that particular partnership with Great Lakes efforts identified a series of areas along the St. Louis River corridor that, and that all flows right into the Lake Superior, which then goes to the rest of the Great Lakes. And over the last 10, 15 years at least, there's been a number of major cleanup efforts going on throughout that corridor that not only is cleaning up the St. Louis River and its tributaries, but cleaning up the harbor that people love to go and visit and vacation at, but also ensuring that that's what's coming out of that source, the St. Louis River, and feeding right into Superior, is going to be cleaner water, less sediment, less erosion, less historic pollution. That a lot of it is historic pollution from industry back 80 and 100 years ago, where rules were very different and things were put into the rivers. They're now being dredged out, and then the bottom's being capped to make sure that historic pollution, if it can't be removed, at least keep it in place so it can't further affect what's going on. And so we're in contact with other Great Lakes agency or other agencies that border Great Lakes, letting them know what we're doing here, and they share what they're doing in waters that feed into the Great Lakes. Another, I guess, more recent COVID related, there are states that along the Great Lakes that have been talking to each other, talking about regulatory flexibility, where industries that are permitted by our agencies, they're feeling the constraints of COVID-19 also, and we understand that. So if they're having an issue or problem, it gets down to just collaboration and communication. Let us know what your problem is. If there is some flexibility in the regulations, we'll talk about it and we'll work through it. If not, then we let them know that too, just so everyone knows where they stand, whether it's in a normal time or a tough time like we've had the last 12, 14 months.
You just mentioned something that I've never heard before. It's really of interest to me. You said that you cap the historic pollution in the harbor in Duluth. How do you do so? How do you cap something that's beneath the surface of the water like that?
I'll try and uncomplicate it as explained to me. Right in, I guess I'll pick an example of, if you're familiar with Duluth, where the William A. Irvin ship is docked, and that's a tourist attraction. In the last couple of years, that was moved out of that slip because there was a lot of historic pollution underneath in the ground underneath the water. So that was a perfect example where they dredged what they could. And then when they got down to a certain level, determining, okay, how much more dredging is going to maybe murk the waters more than it's worth doing. So get out as much as is, available and easy to access. And then there's liners that are developed, similar to liners that are at a lot of landfills that you hear of,
Mm-hmm.
capping waste. It's that same concept, kind of capping the waste that's there, and then putting natural rocks and things over top of that to make sure it stays in place.
Mm.
And then that habitat can reestablish itself when the waters settle, and there's still the rock beds and things where they can breed and live like they normally do.
So you entomb some of the compounds, but the stuff that's dredged out, does that end up in a conventional landfill, or how is that processed?
It's pulled out, and then they, it's tested to determine exactly what it is, how much pollution might be in it, what kind of substances are in it, and then they determine what's the best route to dispose of it. And there are many alternatives. Treating it as hazardous waste, that's certain things that have to be done. If it's treated as solid waste, it's treated differently.
Mm-hmm.
Some things can be incinerated, some things can be landfilled, and others have to be handled as hazardous wastes.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the enforcement powers of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency?
I can. We are the permitting and enforcement authority for air, land, and water. So examples of what we permit, landfills, like I mentioned, in our solid waste, hazardous waste handling facilities, municipal, like city wastewater treatment plants, which are all over the state, our air quality, anything that you see that emits air, if there's a smokestack, they have to have certain permits for that. There's stormwater is another one that is in the water field. Construction stormwater, meaning if you're doing a construction project and you're disturbing 1 or more acres of land, you have to have stormwater permits. And then with those, for example, there's guidelines, there's rules and regulations that have to be followed. And if there are violations of those rules, then our agency has the authority to identify those through inspections or reports we might get from citizens that may notice something. Then it gets investigated, and there's many avenues that can be taken. There are a lot of enforcement actions that are don't carry any monetary penalties. They can be simply as, hey, we've identified these violations. If you can fix them within 30 days, then we're all good. Just keep following the rules. I'm simplifying a little bit, but for more egregious or more serious violations, then there are different levels of enforcement that might kick in. And then after a few levels, then they do carry monetary penalties where, and they can run the gamut, anywhere from a few $100s to many hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've even had a couple penalties in the millions of dollars over the many years. And the whole purpose is to make sure that we're not anti-development or anti-industry or companies making progress and profit, but in doing so, we just need to make sure they're doing it in a responsible way that isn't adversely affecting their part of the world and the bigger part of our state and beyond our borders. And when they do, we have the authority to hold them accountable and make corrective actions, pay a penalty if needed, and then continue operating under the rules. They've got set guidelines, and if there's a problem down the road, whether it's another year or 12 years later, then we revisit that. And past actions can be taken into account if there's a new problem too. So if you're a repeat, you have repeat violations, then we might have to do something a little more in depth. If it's the first time or it's a spill or an accident, we take that into account and just want to get it cleaned up and not necessarily penalize people, just make sure it's cleaned up and the problem is taken care of.
Sure. Well, let's talk about something that we're all fairly familiar with, which is the salting of our roads this time of year. I understand that granular salt that's used on road applications can pose a risk to the environment. So before we talk about alternatives to that, what is that risk? How is that affecting our environment, the salting of roads?
The chemical that is the problem in salt is called chloride. And what it can do, if it gets into water, it is not easy to get it out. It's not something that is easily filtered out. It doesn't dissipate on its own. Once chloride is in the water, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
To get it out is a very complex and costly endeavor. So the more chloride that gets into a waterway, it affects the water chemistry, which then can affect the aquatic life, all the bugs, fish, reptiles, amphibians that depend on the quality water to have good oxygen in the water. And so that's what the concern is, that it will definitely affect water quality and the quality of aquatic life. So we work hard to educate people on alternative products that have become more available, that have much less chlorine in them, and will have less of an effect. But going further and doing extensive training to people so they know how best to apply those products, so they don't over apply them when that's not needed, because more of it will wash away and cause more problems with if it gets into ditches and streams and then lakes and rivers.
So what are some of the alternatives? Is there a salt brine, or what type of non-chloride applications are there? And do you partner with the DOT, the Department of Transportation, on this effort?
Yeah, I can't talk too intelligently about the science and chemistry of what the products are. I apologize for that, but what we do.
That's good, because I can't either.
But there are, over the years, been products developed that are alternatives to the traditional chloride-rich salt, or combinations of the two, traditional salt with some other alternatives, or combining it with sand, just in an effort to dilute the amount of chloride that's going down. And our agency has an extensive training program, and there's different levels of training, whether it's plowing crews for counties, cities, townships, even you mentioned DOT, the statewide DOT crews, just educating them on chloride and the use of it and proper application when they're out plowing our roads and applying salt at the same time. We also have training for business owners. You own a gas station and you need to salt your sidewalks. Here's the best way to do it. Here's how much salt you need. Or owners of an apartment building or a land owners association, or a neighborhood that's got a neighborhood association, a group of townhomes or something. Those folks can get trained also on what they can do, how best to apply salt, whether it's just on their sidewalk or in huge parking lots or roadways.
Well, let's talk about perfluorinated compounds, or forever chemicals, often referred to as PFAS or PFOA, or sometimes C8. I understand that's not only a threat in the East Metro, but now there have been measurements elsewhere in the state, and evidently it's found even here in Bemidji. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the PCA's effort to either regulate or monitor forever chemicals.
Yeah, this is a newer effort and endeavor for the PCA, a very large one and high priority, I might add. Just yesterday, we had a public announcement and a media event talking about what the PCA is doing. And we launched a website or web pages on our larger website that has all the details. There's a whole PFAS blueprint is what it's called. And it's talking about what the agency is doing, how we and other partners, other agencies, it's not just PCA, but we're kind of at the heart of it, how we're trying to research and really find where, not just where the problems are, but how widespread they can be. You were totally right in saying it's not just a metro area problem. You're finding it more and more at different parts of the state. Bemidji, Brainerd had some too, and there was a recent effort to clean up a lot of a problem through the wastewater treatment plant. They were having some problems from a past industry. But a lot of the effort is in finding where the problems are, how widespread it is, and then, the obvious next step is determining what can we do about it, knowing that they are forever chemicals. Once they're there, they're there. How can we educate people and industry on either eliminating it from industry processes, reducing it, and just letting people know where it's found, what kind of products or everyday products that you're used to having in your home might contain these chemicals, and letting them know again, there are alternatives. Look for these kinds of things that don't have those compounds in them. It's a very large problem. I'm not the expert at all on that topic, but I do know that if folks go on to the PCA website and do a search, whether you're searching chloride or you're searching PFOS, you'll be guided right to the pages that'll give you all the information you want to know.
Now, it's my understanding that most of what you're doing in that regard is educational, because most PFAS are not regulated, correct? So your primary role is to raise awareness then?
Again, it's a complicated process that eventually will include both aspects, not just making people aware, but also working on, what kind of rules can be developed, what kinds of new or modified regulations can be put in place that might be a different avenue to tackle the problem. In early stages, so there's not a lot that I can, say that's definite. Sure. But I can definitely say that the agency is a very high priority, and we're working large groups of our staff working very hard on it.
Well, Stephen, we only have a couple more minutes here, but I've got a couple more questions for you. So let's talk about lead. Here in our viewing region, of course, we have a lot of anglers. So I was wondering what you could tell us about lead in tackle and used as sinkers and that type of thing. What's the status on using lead in fishing tackle?
We have a program called Get the Lead Out. So I'm glad you asked about that. And it is educational effort. It was something that we started about 15 years ago, and couldn't really get it high off the ground back then. We didn't have much funding for it, but now we've got funding, a 3-year grant that is going to be a large education effort, talking about why lead tackle is harmful. And it's mostly to wildlife, loons, very specifically to Minnesota, because that's our state bird. They go and get pebbles to use in part of their digestion process, and they can't differentiate what's lead tackle or a lead sinker from a pebble.
Sure.
So they ingest that, and it's very harmful to birds. So we are working toward, there are rules that are hopefully coming soon that will make it so you can't use lead tackle, but there's so much of it out there. And once people get their tackle box full, they might have it for a long time. So there's efforts to make tackle exchanges. If we can get out and be more face-to-face, hopefully when the pandemic goes down, we plan to get out on education efforts, whether it's resorts or governor's fishing opener as an opportunity, things like that, to have non-lead tackle on hand and exchange with anglers so they can turn in their lead and they get non-lead tackle. There's also a large database that we have on our website that shows where people can go, where they can buy non-lead tackle. Retailers all over the state that have it, and it's gotten better. The products have gotten better over time, and the price has gotten more equal with the traditional tackle too. So it's more attractive for people to want to do it because it's not a lot more expensive, and it's as effective as the traditional tackle.
So I sourced one of my questions, Stephen, from some of our regional college students, and their question was, where is away anyway? In other words, when we throw away household waste, where does that end up, and is it safely dealt with here in Minnesota?
Yes, it is safely dealt. If it's a hazardous waste, there are, again, permitted hazardous waste handlers who are permitted to transport it and then store it uh, in proper containment and labeling so everyone knows what it is, where it is, how much it is. So a lot of it is stored. Disposing of it is, that's part of the process, making sure it gets to the proper hazardous waste handlers. It's not an easy problem, but it's one that is very well regulated.
Mhm.
And so I think people can rest assured it's not ending up just in landfills or in the regular garbage stream. It is being handled separately and very carefully.
How many open landfills do we have in Minnesota? Right now, Germany has 0 open landfills in its entire country. I'm curious, how many open landfills do we have in Minnesota?
Hmm, I I can't give an exact number. I know there are many more closed landfills than there are open landfills.
Okay,
Um, and that's not a great answer, but that's
well,
my
that's
honest
fine.
answer. Some of the largest ones are in the metro that you may have heard
Mhm.
of. But that's been a long time program with PCA too, the open and closed landfill program. Because once they're closed, there's still work to do to make sure um, there's proper venting of the gases that are produced and that they're not leaching waste out of their boundaries to get into other water sources.
Groundwater. Sure. Well, I understand that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is the steward of the Volkswagen emissions scandal settlement money and working hard to electrify part of our transportation sector. So, can you tell us a little bit about the future of electric vehicles in Minnesota?
Yeah, the VW settlement has gone a long way in funding a lot of efforts to um, uh, buses, not just school buses, but city buses. A lot of them have been um, switched over to electric engines instead of traditional gas powered or diesel powered engines. A lot of the money goes toward that. There's also a whole new initiative called the Clean Cars Initiative that MPCA is charged with making rules to work toward more electric vehicles, not just more on the road, but more accessible to people who want to get electric cars. So there's more charging stations. It's just one simple solution.
Hmm.
Right now, if you're in Bemidji or Brainerd, it's probably hard to find a charging station if you have electric vehicles. So we're working toward rules that will fund that kind of an effort too, to get not just more electric vehicles out there, but more opportunities to power those vehicles so people can travel from Baudette to Burnsville without getting stranded halfway.
Nice. Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time. So, my last question is for you and about you, Stephen. I'm curious, is this just a job? Why are you drawn to working at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency?
Uh, well, I'm at 25 years with the agency. And when I look back, I started and never thought it was going to be my career job. I was young and didn't know near as much as I thought I did. But the longer I worked at the agency, the more I saw that what I was doing was making the environment that I love in Minnesota and grew up with a little better. And hopefully my efforts and all of my coworkers' efforts are doing that collectively and making Minnesota a safer and healthier place for when my kids have their kids and so on. And so that's what really has kept me around, that you take pride in the work that we're doing. It's not always popular, but you always feel like even if it's not popular, it's still doing the right thing.
Well, Stephen, I want to thank you for those efforts. And I also want to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And thank all of you for joining me once again. I'm Jason Edens, your host of Lakeland Currents. Be kind and be well. We'll see you next week.